Good day to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for June 14th, 2026. And today, we are still watching the Gulf for potential development with our system that originated from the Bay of Campeche. It moved inland over Mexico, but the National Hurricane Center is still watching the potential for development early next week in the northwestern Gulf, closer to the Gulf Coast. So we can't entirely rule out development here just yet. And as I'll show you with the models today, looks like there is still a tiny chance that something could happen, although it'll definitely not take away from the biggest threat of all with this disturbance here in the Gulf, which I've been talking about over the last several days, and that is the potential for heavy rainfall, which we will once again talk about in today's video too. Let's start off though by taking a look at the National Hurricane Center homepage with their tropical weather bulletin, where every single video begins basically, because obviously the main source of information we get on the tropics comes from the National Hurricane Center. And as of their 8 a.m. outlook, they still have the disturbance here in the northwestern Gulf. 20% chance of development over the next 7 days, so a low chance of development right now. Again, the disturbance here is still over Mexico. It moved inland over Mexico from the Bay of Campeche yesterday, and it looks like, or at least there's a chance that we could see this reemerge over the Gulf either tomorrow or Tuesday, before more than likely all of the moisture and energy associated with this disturbance will move inland for good by Wednesday. And then in the Eastern Pacific, we also have another area of interest here, which we will talk about briefly. Invest 93E, 30% chance of development right now, and this, I believe, is kind of somewhat related to the ghost of Amanda. If you remember that storm from earlier this month in the Pacific, it's still out there, and looks like it's trying to redevelop somewhat, but low chance of development of that happening right now. But of course, we will go over 93 in a little bit. Here's a satellite shot of the Atlantic and the Pacific. The main focus of interest in the Atlantic right now is in the Gulf, and you can see that there is generally some moisture and some showers and thunderstorms firing up along the Texas coast and along the northern Mexico coast, but beyond that, not much else interesting happening in the Atlantic. Very dry throughout the Caribbean and the MDR. Typical of the early season this year, or typical of the early season of any given year, but also probably going to be a reoccurring theme as we have El Nino in place this year. And then looking at the Pacific, also nice and quiet right now, at least further to the east, but further to the west. You can see where Invest 93E here is brewing, and we'll take a look at that again in a little bit. The vorticity signature, though, at least in the Gulf, there's definitely a vorticity signature still there. It's very elongated and broad right now, as you can see, and that's to be expected given that this is moved over land. So obviously there's not going to be much of a defined circulation. Not that this ever really had a defined circulation, but any circulation that was there definitely got, stretched out and is now not really anything formidable. But of course, we will see if it's able to move back out over the Gulf here. The water temperatures are pretty warm, and I should have brought up the sea surface temperature map, but they are pretty warm, and especially if this moves out over the Gulf enough, and spend at least a day or two over water, maybe this could try to reconsolidate a little bit. And something that is often not talked about, some people talk about it, but others not as much as it should be, but as well, the shape of the Gulf, and you're wondering why I'm bringing up the shape of the geography of land. That actually does have an impact on whether or not circulations are able to consolidate as well. And sometimes the northwestern Gulf here is known for allowing systems to be able to consolidate easier because of the general shape. Geographical shape of the Gulf here, which is much more curved, especially in the Bay of Campeche, which is also why, if you remember me talking about this before, the Bay of Campeche sometimes is notorious, especially this early in the season, for these quick spin-ups of storms that really quickly form hours before sometimes they move into Mexico. And this was not able to happen, fortunately, with this system here before, but obviously there's still the chance, and we'll have to see whether or not this energy here that's over Mexico is able to make its way back offshore in the northwestern Gulf, and maybe that'll help it try to consolidate once again. Of course, we will see though. But one thing that will happen regardless, and one thing this disturbance will bring, is a lot of moisture, especially across the U.S., and we are already seeing that right now. In fact, we have a trough here digging down from the Midwest, and this is going to advance eastward, and this is actually going to bring a pretty decent severe weather threat for the Northeast today. But you could see where we especially have a lot of moisture, and by the way, this satellite shot is called the water vapor satellite, and this just generally gives us an idea of how much moisture there is in the atmosphere. And the more you see of these oranges and reds, that's dry air, and the more you see of these grays and dark grays and blues, which that is probably convective activity in and of itself, that represents more moisture, and there's a lot of moisture over Mexico. And as this trough continues to dig off to the south and then to the east, and this front also pushes as well to the east here, that's eventually going to cause all of the energy and moisture here over Mexico to lift northward and eventually be strung out across the southeast. And regardless of whether or not our disturbance here close to the Gulf Coast is able to move out offshore enough because of the front here and try to develop, we will see heavy rainfall regardless across the southeast and across the Gulf Coast. And that's something, if you've been following me for the last week or so, you've been saying I've been talking about the fact that regardless we would get a lot of moisture here and probably a lot of heavy rainfall. And there is the risk of flash flooding according to the Weather Prediction Center for tomorrow and Tuesday. And that is going to be an impact regardless of whether this develops or not. So please keep that in mind here as we go out into the start of next week. And I'll show you the rainfall totals expected here over the next week along the southeast in just a little bit. Here's a look at 93E though in the Pacific. Our invest right now there. And they're already on Invest 93E, and we're just into the first half of June. Things are pretty active in the Eastern Pacific right now, at least overall with the season, and it's only going to get more active from here on. And you can see a decent-looking system right now with 93E. There's probably some sort of low-level circulation trying to build, and there is convective activity pretty, hefty over the storm right now. Or at least, especially in the recent frames, it looks like there's a new convective burst trying to blow over. But we'll see if whether or not this develops. Regardless, this is going to be yet another system that kind of develops here and then just curves on off to the northward and eventually northwestward and out to sea. Not going to impact anybody. Hawaii is probably somewhere off in the distance here, but more than likely by the time it gets to this range here in the track guidance, 96 to 120 hours out, whatever system is left is probably going to be very dead. And taking a look at the intensity guidance for 93E, not much is expected of this anyways. Most of the models aren't even really developing this. And again, the National Hurricane Center only has a 30% chance of this developing right now. So more than likely not going to amount to much, but if we do get a name out of it, it's going to stay well out to sea and not really going to be a concern to anybody. All right, now let's take a look at the models, especially focusing in on the Gulf here, since I think that is probably the biggest area of concern for actual impacts right now in the tropics. And as you can see here, the GFS kind of backtracking to yesterday a little bit. Obviously, we had the vorticity with the disturbance move across the Bay of Campeche and then inland over Mexico yesterday, and now today the energy is mostly inland, and you can see here the actual pocket of energy that actually is pretty decent over southern Texas here on the GFS. But I guess the GFS keeps the ridge strong enough that the energy here from the disturbance ends up just mostly staying on land. And then eventually you can see here, as the trough moves on off to the north here, the energy gets strung out across the southeast, and this whole system gets catapulted eastward and remains over land. But obviously the biggest thing that will remain is the heavy rainfall threat, as the moisture from the system will still be in place of course, regardless again of whether or not we will actually see development here. But let's go to the euro, and already you can see a sneak peek here, hour 144, of the very interesting thing that the euro did today. I'll explain as to why, though, you shouldn't really be concerned, but still keep in mind for trends that the euro is doing. But the euro, 60 run, you can see the energy kind of emerges here from southern Texas. And interestingly enough, the euro does bring this a little bit more offshore now, let's say, compared to the 0Z run. Well, the 0Z run was basically the same, but yesterday, the 18Z run, still kind of leaning a little bit more offshore. I think the euro in general has been trending a little bit more towards the euro AI model, which I'll show you in a little bit, which actually brings this system offshore and tries to consolidate a little bit here in the northwestern Gulf before bringing the system onshore into Louisiana. But same general deal here. Disturbance moves northward and then eventually gets flung to the northeastward. But interestingly enough, the euro consolidates this over land. And let me show you the actual pressure here on the euro. They have this a 995 millibar, probably tropical looking system over Mississippi, and then just bringing this off very quickly here throughout the southeast. And this is a very funny solution. And if you're probably seeing this, you're thinking, oh my God, are we actually going to have a tropical storm that'll develop over land? No, we are not. I would not be concerned about that happening. And obviously, if you are somebody who is generally familiar with how tropical systems happen, the main source of energy is from warm ocean waters, not from storms developing over land here. So would not at all be concerned about the potential of something developing over land here like the euro shows. It's generally a part of a weird bias that the European sometimes has, in which it kind of shows a brown ocean effect type of deal happening, and that's actually what in general tropical systems strengthening or kind of forming near land instead of far out over the water is called brown ocean effect, given that, instead of a storm developing over regular waters, it's developing on or near land. So, brown instead of blue. I think you get the picture. But the euro tends to have a bias in showing the brown ocean effect happening with tropical systems. So it probably is absolutely overdoing the energy here, especially consolidating into a tropical system over the southeast instead of near the Gulf Coast. So it's probably overdoing it. But one thing that'll definitely remain, and it probably shows up very strongly here, is a lot of the heavy rainfall will definitely be in place. And obviously the euro is amplifying it a little bit because of the fact that they show a stronger storm and a more amplified storm than in reality. But still, heavy rainfall, Texas, Louisiana, stretching into Mississippi. Some, totals here indicated by the euro, we might see up to a foot of rain in some areas, especially throughout Texas and Louisiana. So this is going to be a pretty big deal. And let's actually see what the total forecast precipitation from the GFS is too. And they show the same deal as well. Portions of Texas seeing at least up to half a feet of rain. And stretching into Louisiana and throughout the southeast too, but isolated pockets potentially seeing up to a foot of rain. So lots of moisture regardless, and especially since we're going to have a lot of moisture in a short period of time here, the threat is there for potentially heavy rainfall that will lead to flash flooding and other kinds of flood situations here across the South. And that is a pretty big deal because flooding, as I always say, is the number one killer. When it comes to tropical cyclones, flooding is the number one killer. And time again over the last several years, we've seen instances where we've had these big flood events that have caught people off by surprise and ended up ending in very unfortunate, tragic events here. So this is no deal to mess around with. We are going to see a pretty decent flood threat for those across the South, especially in Texas and Louisiana, as we begin the week next week. So if you are in those areas, or if you know anybody that is in those areas, tell them to beware and prepare. because we are going to see some pretty decent rainfall here and some pretty decent flooding, and obviously that is not a good thing. Really quickly, I want to show you, though, another interesting solution, and that is the European AI. The European regular operational, this model here, obviously takes the disturbance and tries to bring it offshore a little bit near Texas here. But the AI model, interestingly enough, this is the AI version of the European, brings the energy offshore here near the Texas coastline and tries to consolidate a little bit before, I guess, making landfall near Texas and Louisiana here. Maybe this is more than likely a weak tropical storm or something like that tries to get going. And I think the main reason why the National Hurricane Center is still highlighting the northwestern Gulf here for potential development of this disturbance, even though it's going to be a very close type of deal here to the coast, is probably because of the AI models. And I will say that the European AI has been showing development here in the northwestern Gulf for probably the last few days, even before we started to see the regular operational models begin to shift more and more towards the European AI solution. And to close out here are the European AI ensembles, and a lot of them actually show this moving offshore. And you even have a few ensembles here, especially the more further southeast ensembles here, bringing this closer towards central Louisiana and having this actually be a little bit stronger here. And you can actually see that there are some ensembles in the low 1000s and upper 990s. It'll be very interesting to see what happens here in the northwestern Gulf, and I am especially interested to see because the AI models have been showing this solution for at least the last few days here, and I guess the National Hurricane Center took note of it, and maybe they're starting to trust the AI models more, and that's a very interesting development as we go throughout the season, because maybe the new kings or the crown kings for model forecasting and accuracy this hurricane season will come from the AI. So I think this will be a huge test with this disturbance. Does it move on out over water again and try to develop like the AI models are showing, or will this lean more towards the operational and stay very close to land, if not still remain onshore? And this just ends up being a rain event system for Texas and Louisiana, which is still significant. Again, want to write that point home. Not something to take lightly, even if that's what ends up being the case. But development wise, in terms of tropics, we'll see whether or not the AI model ends up being right here, and they've had the more consistent solution over the last several days. So again, we will see, and obviously for the next few days still, we will be watching the tropics here in the Gulf very, very closely. With that being said, though, I'm going to end it off for today's tropical discussion. Hope you enjoyed what you saw today. If you did, I would really appreciate if you like this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. As I say, every single video would really appreciate me if you help me out, especially in terms of being able to hopefully grow and get the algorithm to be more favorable to my channel, which I would really like, especially right about now. So please, again, if you really enjoyed what you saw today, I appreciate if you would subscribe, especially because, again, we will continue to do these videos on a daily basis all throughout the entirety of hurricane season, no matter what happens this year. So if you're interested in that, again, we would really appreciate if you subscribe. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday, enjoy the rest of your weekend as well, and also enjoy the week ahead. I'm Danilo Evangelista. I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow.